This is an Irish independent podcast.
Right now, Donald Trump feels very prominent in our lives, and that extends to the world of sport. We thought it might be interesting to take stock of his influence. It would be wrong, of course, to portray sport as somehow centre stage in his presidency. It's not. His presidency has a lot going on. But sport definitely is on the agenda. We could start in any number of places, but let's start with something which is very real and very tangible and very recent. It's February 6th. Just over 2 weeks ago, President Trump is sitting at a table. He's surrounded by smiling girls, teenagers, women, and he calls on everyone to gather in close. We can hear the scrawl of the pen on the paper.
I want to make this a really good signature because this is a big one, right? Oh, I think we have a 10. We have a 10.
God bless you, Mr. President.
Trump is signing yet another executive order. He's already signed 60 since his inauguration. And in typical Trumpian style, the issue at hand may be complex, but his position and language are very simple. This executive order is called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports.
With this executive order, the war on women's sports is over. Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
At the stroke of a pen, this is now federal law in every single US state. In schools and in universities, trans athletes will not compete with women. But the ramifications will go beyond the US. Trump already has an eye on what will be a blue-ribboned event in his second term, the 2028 Olympic Games in LA.
So when the Olympics comes to Los Angeles in 2028, my administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes, and we're just not going to let it happen, and it's going to end, and it's ending right now, and nobody's going to be able to do a damn thing about it, because when I speak, we speak with authority.
The room approves, and the likelihood of a trans athlete representing the US has dwindled to basically zero. What's more, though, Trump has said his government will deny visas to any transgender Olympian in 2028. They are not welcome in LA, even if the rules allow for their participation. In truth, you would have to say Trump is not necessarily leading the line on this issue. He's simply in line with public sentiment. A 2023 Gallup survey in the US showed 70% of people agree with his position, and that was up from 62% in 2021. Public sentiment is hardening against trans athletes in women's sports. Here at home, in 2022, the IRFU banned trans athletes from female rugby. The English Rugby Union has done the same. Any number of sports are following suit. But there's no doubt Trump's order will increase the speed of travel. The day after he signed it, the NCAA, which is the governing body for college sport in the US, changed its policy in accordance with the law. No trans athletes to compete. This issue of trans athletes really blew up during Trump's 4 years out of office. For instance, the first openly trans athlete to win a Division II NCAA event was in 2019. That was Che Telfer over 400-metre hurdles. Then the swimmer Leah Thomas was a lightning rod for debate in 22. She became the first trans athlete to win a Division I national title. There were protests outside the venue when she was competing. On foot of Trump's order, the NCAA will now move to strike those wins from the record books. They never happened. Whatever your position on transgender athletes, a fact worth noting regards the numbers involved. Trump talks about the issue as a war on female sports, a mass invasion almost. But in December, the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, sat before a congressional hearing, and he told them there are 520,000 college athletes competing across America. He was asked how many of those 500,000 college athletes are trans. Baker said less than 10. So despite all the focus on this issue, this has not been the widespread invasion of trans athletes. There are not hundreds or thousands of men cynically going through hormone suppression treatment to win a few medals. That said, much of the science suggests trans athletes do hold a significant advantage once they've gone through male puberty. Trump, and sport at large, are coming around to that conclusion. And he has rubber-stamped that feeling this month. Then, of course, with Trump, there is always golf. We know he plays. You only have to watch his debate with Joe Biden to know he plays very well.
I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart, and you have to be able to hit the ball a long way, and I do it. He doesn't do it. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. He challenged me to a golf match. He can't hit a ball 50 yards.
I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie, that he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have,
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
We all obviously died a little bit during that exchange. But what's been really interesting with golf is Trump's standing in the game, and in particular how it's fluctuated. In a way, it mirrors the way Trump's more radical, rough around the edges aspect has been normalised over the past decade. Jump back to 2015. Trump, the candidate, has just uttered his infamous "Mexico is sending us their rapists and their criminals" line. Now, these days, Trump would say that kind of stuff routinely and with impunity. But 2015 into 2016, it was a scandal, and there was a general agreement a politician simply can't talk like that. Golf certainly thought so. So much so that the PGA Tour took a World Golf Championship event away from Trump National in Miami. His course lost the event, the contract was cancelled, and in golfing terms, he was a pariah. In a pointed move, the PGA moved the event to Mexico. Trump responded by saying, "They're moving it to Mexico City. I hope they have kidnapping insurance." Since then, the Saudis have staged a remarkable mini takeover of the sport, and golf is stuck in a kind of civil war. It's very much the PGA Tour versus Live Golf. Trump's election was greeted as almost a healing moment for the sport.
As we speak, it looks like Donald Trump is going to be the next president of America. He says he can fix the Live PGA Tour deal in 15 minutes. Your thoughts?
He might be able to. I mean, he's got Elon Musk, who I think is the smartest man in the world beside him, so he might be able to do something if we can get Musk involved too. But it's, I think from the outside looking in, it's probably a little less complicated than it actually is. But obviously, Trump has a great relationship with Saudi Arabia. He's got a great relationship with golf. He's a lover of golf, so maybe.
Well, maybe is becoming a reality. In recent weeks, the PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan met with Trump. Yes, the same crowd who took the WGC event away from Trump Doral in 16. Apparently, they had a great meeting. Last week, Tiger Woods, who's part of the PGA Tour Live negotiations, and not a man prone to hyperbole ever, pronounced golf would now, quote, heal quickly because of Trump's involvement. McIlroy, who had once vowed never to play a round of golf again with Trump, talked last week about their recent round together. From pariah in 2016 to the sport's most significant power broker in 2025, it's been quite the journey. As he's wont to say himself, he has staged the greatest political comeback in history. Trump also made history in becoming the first sitting president to attend the Super Bowl this year. He's not a man immune to ratings and good PR, so why wouldn't he go? But he never went during his first term, and so it did feel like his attendance spoke of something else, a victory lap. There was a time during Trump's first term when he was at war with a huge quotient of the players. Colin Kaepernick at the time was leading an extraordinary social justice movement which gathered momentum right across the league. Protesting police brutality, Kaepernick and many others took the knee during the national anthem. President Trump, speaking in 2017, didn't think much of it.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
His political base approved. Fast forward to this year's Super Bowl, Kaepernick is no longer a player, nobody is taking the knee, and as John Batiste sang the national anthem pre-game, Trump appeared on the big screen.
And bright star through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched.
It was beautiful PR. Some boos in there too, but mostly cheers. For added spice, Taylor Swift, who'd so publicly endorsed Kamala Harris, was booed, when she appeared on screen. As well as the Olympics in 28, it is just Trump's luck that the US will also host the world's biggest sporting event during his second term. And Trump has more than leaned into FIFA and his newfound friend.
I just want to say you're led by a man named Johnny. I just know him as Johnny, and he's a winner. And he's the president, and I'm the president, and we've known each other a long time. And I'm so honored to have this kind of a relationship because soccer is going through the roof.
Infantino was 6 rows back at Trump's inauguration, just over the shoulders of Harris and Biden. It wasn't quite alongside the tech bros, but it was a good seat. In a few moments, we'll chat to US sports writer Mark Cannizzaro and political journalist Marion McKeone. But first, one other aspect to Trump and sport is combat sports. He's enjoyed a decades-long relationship with the UFC and Dana White, and it's an interesting one. It goes all the way back to 2001. At the time, the UFC was regarded as a freak show, almost taboo. The company literally had nowhere to go. Basically, no venues would take them. Even Las Vegas said no. And then Trump stepped in. He owned a casino in Atlantic City, and he struck a deal with the UFC to host fights. Dana White recalled, "Nobody took us seriously, except for Donald Trump." And since then, they've been allies. Dana White endorsed Trump in 2015 when few people were endorsing him. And back in November, just gone, on election night, Trump, of course, called his good friend up to stage.
I'd like to ask Dana just to say a couple of words because people love to hear from him. Dana, please.
Nobody deserves this more than him, and nobody deserves this more than his family does. This is what happens when the machine comes after you. What you've seen over the last several years, this is what it looks like. Couldn't stop him. He keeps going forward. He doesn't quit. He's the most resilient, hard-working man I've ever met in my life. His family are incredible people. This is karma, ladies and gentlemen. He deserves this. They deserve it as a family. I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, Bustle with the boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan. And thank you, America. Thank you. Have a good night.
What's been so striking about the UFC, Dana White, Theo Vaughn, Donald Trump, American voters, this whole nexus, is how they've evolved together. By that I mean the UFC should not really be a political movement, but it has become one under Dana White. In December, they announced they were teaming up with Jeremy's Razors as their official UFC razors. Now, these razors are marketed as woke-free razors. I don't know what the difference is between a woke and a woke-free shave, but Dana White knows what UFC fans prefer. Back in 2001, Trump couldn't have known that the UFC would become a behemoth, and in particular a behemoth for so many of his target voters in a presidential election, an election he wasn't even really thinking about in the first place. He also couldn't have known that Joe Rogan would simultaneously become the main UFC commentator and the world's leading podcast host, where Trump would so memorably appear during his 2024 campaign. And yet somehow all of these things have grown and coalesced beautifully and in sync. It's like that Steve Jobs line about only being able to join the dots in retrospect. That whole Trump, combat sports, podcast manosphere was a real aspect in the closing aspects of the 24 election. One last one, and let's not worry about whether WWE wrestling is a sport or not. For Trump, wrestling is the perfect cocktail of entertainment and money and bombast. As far back as the 1980s, he even funded WrestleMania 4 and 5, which took place at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City 20 years before Dana White and the UFC would rock up. By 2007, Trump was guesting as a character, involved in storylines opposite Vince McMahon. Here they are in 2007, and needless to say, Trump is very, very good as a wrestler character.
Why are you here?
Let me put it very simply, Vince. I'm taller than you. I'm better looking than you. I think I'm stronger than you. And I'm here to challenge you to a match in WrestleMania.
What? Oh, I get it. It's the Battle of the Billionaire.
That's right.
You don't need me to tell you, Trump won the Battle of the Billionaires. And as per the forfeit, he shaved Vince McMahon's head in the ring. So what might be a fair point? But in 2025, the newly appointed leader of the American education system is, naturally, Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince, a woman with zero experience in a classroom or of the education system, full stop. Let's talk to sports writer Mark Cannizzaro and political journalist Marion McKeone. Marion McKeone is a political journalist well known to all of you listening. I'm sure she covers American politics and life at large. And Mark Cannizzaro is a US sports writer. He has been at the New York Post for over 30 years. He covers golf, the NFL, and more besides. You're both very, very welcome. Marion, we just signed off there trying to wrap our arms around Trump and sport at large. And we just touched on this whole Dana White, the UFC, Joe Rogan, podcasting, Theo Vaughn, this kind of mansphere as it's talked about, that whole nexus. You would have covered the election in a kind of granular detail. That did feel like a significant thing. You know, Trump went on Rogan, Kamala Harris didn't. It almost was like he's found a direct line to this huge swathe of voters.
Yeah, you know, he has, but I think it has to be said that Trump has always been involved in sports, and he's always seen sports as a great way of branding himself and showing himself off, whether it's football or whether it's golf or whether it's he's got a particular affinity for extreme sports like UFC. Conor McGregor was at his inauguration. I remember going to the Trump Hotel in Washington D.C. at one time when he owned it. There were two giant sports screens on either side of the bar. On one side was Donald Trump giving his speeches, and on the other side was Conor McGregor beating the crap out of somebody in a ring. So he's always, I think he sees this sort of macho, energy as very much his kind of brand, if you will. And even at the Republican convention this year, last summer, you had Hulk Hogan strutting out on stage and ripping his shirt off. You had Dana White, who is now on the board. I mean, talk about the connections. He's been appointed to the board of Meta. And you have Linda McMahon, who, of course, was very involved in their whole wrestling outfit, who's now about to become the Secretary of Education. So there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of, you had this in the Oval Office just last week, Trump setting up a deal between Jay Monahan, the top executive for the PGA Tour, with Yasir Al-Rumayyan, who's the chairman of the Saudi-backed LIV Golf. Now, Trump this is a shocking conflict of interest, and that this is being done in the White House this could never have happened with another president. They want to try and get a merger on the way. That would all be fine. Presidents often bring people together to reach deals, but Trump has been involved. His family has a big financial interest in this. He's an LIV Golf business partner. They've hosted the LIV tournaments at their venues. There's one planned for the Trump National in Doral in Miami this year for the fourth year in a row. So you've got all of this stuff going on. So yeah, and his association, and then we've so much to talk about when it comes to all the fights Trump has had with different people in different sports. Megan Rapinoe, Colin Kaepernick. I mean, he just gets in there and gets stuck in.
Mark, I know you cover golf, so let's touch on that for a moment in a bit of detail. I remember, I mean, you can portray Trump as a fool if you want, but I remember when Liv began, and it was mostly ridiculed at the start when Phil Mickelson first went over. And I always remember Trump with what proved to be incredibly prescient comments. And he was asked about Liv and this whole business, and he said, well, look, the golfers, they should take the money because there's going to be a merger, and the guys who don't take the money are going to regret it. And off he walked. And here we are 3 years later, and then that is looking like very good advice in retrospect. He has another meeting with the PGA Tour scheduled. Tiger Woods is saying, listen, he's going to heal golf. It looks like he's going to make something happen here. It's stunning how throughout his life his timing is so perfect. Right when the PGA Tour cut ties with him for what he said about Mexican immigrants, then Liv suddenly arrives and it's a new golf league to host his tournaments.
Well, Joe, when you think about it, and Marion touched on it, on all those things she just spoke about a minute ago here, he wants his fingers in everything, right? And he's he forces his way into everything, right? I mean, to some degree, there's a lot of people here in America that feel like he did force his way into the presidency, something that, years ago no one would have thought possible. So he is a golf junkie. I've known him for a long time. I've actually played golf with him one time. Done a bunch of stories on him. He dates back to wanted to force his way into one of the most exclusive clubs in America here in the New York City area, Winged Foot. They wanted no part of him. Those are private clubs. They said, no, thank you. So he said, okay. So we went and started building his own golf courses in and around Winged Foot and boasting that they're all better than Winged Foot, right? So now we fast forward and here he is. He wants to be the hero in the PGA Tour Live, issue. And, a lot of the PGA Tour players who are all multimillionaires, or certainly because of that, are Trump supporters. So he wants to be the hero now. He's kind of forced his way into the fray. He's still ticked off that the PGA of America took away the PGA Championship because of his comments about Mexico. And now here he is right in the forefront, involved again, right? So whether he is the main reason why the two sides merge, which they certainly will because it makes sense on both sides, whether he's the main reason for that or not, he's certainly going to take credit for being the main reason for it.
Yeah, certainly it's been cited that this Department of Justice investigation into the alliance between Live and PGA Tour, the sense is Trump's going to make that go away. So, I mean, there are very kind of tangible benefits to him being involved.
Well, in his eyes, there's tangible benefits for him being the president because he basically can do whatever he wants. I mean, he's, as again, Marion just mentioned a minute ago, it's a friends and family cabinet, basically. He's appointing all of his friends and his pals, into all these important positions, which is just, again, it's mind-boggling for somebody who's seen proper presidents over the years have to conduct themselves, if you will. And it's if it weren't so scary, it would be kind of comical, I guess, from my perspective.
When did you play golf with him and how did that come about?
I did a piece on him. This is probably about 20 or so years ago. His course down in West Palm Beach. It's actually pretty funny because it's just on the other side of the airport. And in between his course and the airport is a jail. And it's kind of a high-rise, if you will, jail, and you can hear the inmates screaming out the windows during their recess or whatever they call it, at the golfers. It's that close. But Trump, who has huge trees all around the golf course to kind of shade it from everything, you can't build trees, large enough for that. So I went down to do a piece on him in the golf course. We played 18 holes together. He plays extremely fast. He doesn't really, as is legendary, anything about 6 or 8 feet inside of the hole is good, which is why his handicap is so low. And it was a fascinating day. I flew down there and to do the piece on him, and he talked about, I referenced the jail because Trump thinks he can do everything, and fix everything, but he still has not been able to fix the inmates yelling out of the jail cells at the golfers over on the far side of the golf course.
You paint a lovely image there, Mark, of the live entertainment for these poor guys stuck in prison. The only thing they've got to watch is Trump playing golf.
Did he take any dodgy drops, Mark? Was everything above board here?
I would, the above board is probably a loose statement about anything he does, isn't it? But he took some drops. There's always an extra. There's legendary stuff about him in golf, as you probably have heard. He actually at several of his golf courses is the I'm going to use air quotes club championship champ. He actually won a club championship last year at one of his clubs. And he didn't even play in it. He just put one of his fake scores in from a previous round, and that qualified him to win the club championship. So, there's a lot of extremely funny stories about him. He literally would drive his golf cart almost up onto the green. Like for all of us golfers, we know that's kind of sacrilege. You're supposed to stay away from those places. He would literally drive his cart right up onto the green. But he's a character, man. It's kind of high comedy when you're around him, and he is who you see on television.
Yeah. Because anyone who's spent time with him, the charisma is real.
It is real. No, listen, he has, whether you like him or not, he has the it factor. He has it. Listen, he's the most polarizing figure in my 60 years on the earth that I've ever seen. On each side. The hate on one side and the worship on the other side. And this second run of presidency, and really the first and the second, but particularly this one, since we're in a different time now, is the greatest example of that. I mean, there is, as you know, I mean, he's divided the world.
Marion, if there's, as well as golf, where he may well have a tangible effect here, the other area, and we're early enough into his second term, obviously, where he's had a tangible effect is on transgender athletes. He signed the executive order, so no transgender athletes will compete in female competition at any state schools or universities. And he has also said that he won't be providing visas to any transgender athletes if their national bodies and the rules allow them to partake at the LA Games in 2028, which is that is very significant. This is obviously part of a wider anti-trans policy. It has to be looked at through that prism. I mean, he has imposed, or he's trying to impose, a ban on the transgender community in the armed forces as well. He thinks it's woke. He thinks it's weak. Like sport, you could say, arguably, there's a protection of the field, and a lot of the science supports his decision on athletics. But in its wider context, it is just an attack on the trans community.
Yeah, and I think this is the very pernicious side of Donald Trump that we see, where, and I agree with Mark, the charisma is very real. People who love him, I see it I saw it at all the events I attended in the last, 10 years now almost, where, he knows how to ignite a room, and he equally knows how to ignite a Democratic room. If you're at a Democratic event, they're pulling their hair out. They despise him with a passion that you have to see to believe. But on this transgender issue, these are very... Trump is a bully, and this is first and foremost, I think, what he is. He's a bully, and he picks the low-hanging fruit. He picks minorities. He picks people that he can kick around without any blowback to him, and he's picked the transgender community, not just because of his own dislike of them, but because it's a very popular Republican MAGA talking point. It is, first of all, I have to say, it is blown completely out of proportion. This was an issue that dominated the election that just went by. It was every event he was at. He was talking about where there'll be no men and women's footballs, making it into this, where you would think, to listen to him, that there were these 6'10" guys who had muscled their way on to play soccer on 8-year-old girls' soccer teams. It's just not true. And we did some research into this. And, first of all, out of about 335 million people living in America, about 0.5% identify as transgender. It's a tiny group. The number who play sports, there are about, in all of America's high schools, for all these talk about the executive orders and the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, which the Republicans ginned up and passed, there are about five transgender athletes playing on girls' teams in American schools at the moment, in all schools. Yeah. 5. And the distortion of this, and all of these other groups have glommed on, like Moms for Liberty, this far-right group of women who were pretty well formed, because they're saying, we're not having guys playing in girls' sports, we're not having men going into little girls' bathrooms. And they make it into this thing where they make it appear as though transgender people became transgender solely for the purpose of messing around with little girls. It's very cruel. It's very unnecessary. It tries to identify something that is almost non-existent and make it into a huge issue because it's popular with his MAGA base. So as I say, it's to me, it's one of the most pernicious things that he has done, and one of the most unnecessary.
I think where sport is interesting here, Marion, is most right-thinking people would look at the trans community and quite clearly see no harm is intended. They're trying to live their life the way they want and just to be happy. Where I think sport it's a useful avenue for him, because I think people would look at like the Leah Thomas swimmer a couple of years ago, where this really started to blow up, and she, trans swimmer, had swam as a male swimmer for several years at university, and then transitioned and then won all around her. And I think most right people thought, well, does the science suggest you can hold a significant advantage? Maybe it's not fair on female athletes. And so maybe Trump saw that lovely opening and said, well, let's expand that to trans rights everywhere.
I think you're absolutely right. He saw it as something that he could beat the drum on and get people outraged. He's very good at getting people outraged about something that's very minor. Now, on a professional level, people are allowed to differ on this. People have different opinions. Some people really think, no, you know what, you do have an unfair advantage if you are born as a biological male and you're playing in women's sports. But that's at a professional level. At a school sports, you're talking about little kids running around a soccer field. Really, as I said, there are 5 of them in that have been identified in all of the schools in America. And to make this kind of a hysterical fuss about it and to pick and really persecute this community, because that is what he's done in the military. And, it's allowed a lot of people to let this community now really does live in a lot of fear. And it's unnecessary, it's cruel, it's unwarranted.
Mark, you were coming in there?
Yeah, I think such a great point that Marion made there, Joe, is to me with this entire topic, the transgender topic, and how minuscule it is. It's a pimple on our ass here, if you will, excuse my language, in the States, compared to all the problems and issues we do have. It's a classic bullying diversion of getting away from the actual topics and issues we have here in the States. The people that can't afford health insurance, the homeless issues, you name all of these things that are so much more important to the American population. And he grabs a hold of that like a chihuahua around the ankle, of the house guest, and won't let go. And it's his diversion of the stuff that really matters. That's what he is so amazing with this sleight of hand, if you will. And that's where I kind of took away from what Marion was speaking to.
You mentioned the good folk at Wingfoot looked at Trump and said, you're not really our type of person. And so he went and built his own golf courses. He did try, you'd probably be able to put a date on it better than me, Mark. He definitely tried to muscle in on NFL once upon a time.
He did. He wanted to own an NFL team, and it just goes back to his love for the sports and how much he wants to be involved and be front and center. And the NFL has now they have 32 teams. They have all 32 owners, and they have to vote somebody in. And they wanted no part of Trump being an owner of an NFL team. He was not approved. So a league called the United States Football League was formed, which was going to be a kind of a rival league, and it didn't last very long. But he owned his own team here in New York City area called the New Jersey Generals, and they spent a lot of money. They signed the biggest signing was this running back, Herschel Walker. At the time was one of the best athletes, best players in the NFL. They lured him away, much like Liv lured the John Rahms and away from the PGA Tour. They did that. It didn't last. I do have a funny anecdote, if you will, about back in that day, because this is my early days as a sports writer. Trump obviously wants the publicity, but I would call his office to get a comment on something. Okay. And his secretary would call, Mr. Cannizzaro, 1 minute. She'd come back and say, well, Mr. Trump actually does not really want to, he's busy right now. He doesn't really want to be quoted, but I'm going to put you on with his top associate, Barron. Okay. This is like 35 years ago. Okay. This is before Barron Trump was, whatever. So Barron, I'm using air quotes again, would come on the telephone, and Trump's voice is pretty distinct, distinct, you know what it is.
Yeah.
It's Trump speaking to me and being quoted as Barron, on behalf of the Trump organization, because Trump didn't want to be quoted. It was one of the most comical things. And then all these years later, when he has his latest kid, here he is, Barron Trump. When I heard the name, I almost fell out of my chair. It was hysterical because I remembered him. I wasn't the only reporter he would do that to. He would always put Barron on to speak on behalf of Mr. Trump.
That is so funny, Mark, because, I remember hearing that from so many journalists. And Barron Trump also went and spoke to journalists about how Madonna was in love with Trump and she just wouldn't leave him alone because she was desperate to date him. And so was Princess Diana. And he used this alter ego. But as you say, his voice, you can't mistake that voice. So he's coming on talking about
He's on the phone with you. He's on the phone with you.
There's such a kind of interesting pattern when you lay out all these different strands, as in He wants to join Winged Foot. They say no, so he sets up his own courses. The PGA Tour excommunicate him in 2016, so he goes and gets into bed with Liv. The NFL owners don't want him, so he gets into an anti-establishment league and gives that a go. The UFC are completely outside the accepted norms back at the turn of the century. He gets into bed with them, and that's kind of... and almost all of it's kind of worked out for him beautifully, but it's like this anti-establishment thread, which kind of just emerges when you look at all his sports dealings.
Well, I think that one point on that is the exact same thing happened with politics. Now, there is a story, and I don't know if it's true, because he talked about becoming president since the 80s, because he's all hyperbolic.
Yeah.
He will never refuse. If somebody says, would you like to be president? Even in his 30s, he's like, yeah, of course, I'd be a great president. But there was the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2012 where Barack Obama was on the stage, and Barack Obama was very good at those events.
Yeah.
He was very funny and very wry, and the crowd loved him. And he mocked Trump mercilessly about the whole birther thing and about and Trump sat there and he was glowering. And I don't think it's necessarily true, but certainly politics was another group, the New York elites. The New York society despised Trump. They wanted no part of him either. And politics thought he was a figure of fun. He was a joke. I remember Seth Meyers saying, oh, we hear Trump's running as a Republican. That's funny because we thought he was running as a joke. And, again, that outsider thing, he was like, by God, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to kick you lot around when I do. Yes. And it's a real pattern of his life that nobody wanted him. And he just forced his way into every arena, and then he took it over.
Yeah.
Joe, if I could just jump in, as Marion was talking a moment ago, I just had this incredible, another funny anecdote that came to me as his first presidency was approaching. I was actually down at Doral at the tournament that he runs. It was right around the time that he had won the Republican nomination. And I was I reached out to one of his top assistants. I won't say her name because I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
Baron.
It was Baroness. It was a woman. So, I was trying to get to her to give me a one-on-one with Trump at, as when he was going to come into town at the golf tournament. And I had been dealing with her over the years, so I kind of knew her a little bit. And I just kind of said to her, because I was incredulous still about the whole presidential run. And I said, can you believe this is all happening? And she said to me, when he won that, she told me that nobody was more surprised that he won the Republican nomination first time around than he was, that he was almost doing it on a lark. And now look at the momentum that is now spurred, since then, now, I mean, it's, the snowball is now ready to crush the earth, right?
Yeah. There's a distinct confidence about him now, Marion, in the office.
Oh, you could certainly call it that. I mean, I think there's a recklessness. Look, he's doing what he said he was going to do, and picking up what Mark said there about it being a lark. I was at the party, the donor party in New York in 2016, the night he won, and talk about if he was surprised he won the nomination. They were stunned that they'd won the election. He came out on stage and he didn't know almost what to say. The family members were all just looking at each other in disbelief. It was this was a branding exercise for him initially, running for the presidency. I think to a degree he thought, well, everyone's going to know who I am after this. The Trump brand will be even more valuable because that's what his business is, essentially. He doesn't really build anything. He puts his name on things and he sells his name in other countries for, big flashy towers and hotels and what have you. So I think what we're seeing now in the White House is it's Trump version 2, and it's as people feared and predicted. I think it's much more pernicious and dangerous and reckless than Trump version 1, where he didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't know at all, but he had people around him like Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson. These were conventional conservative guys. They worked within the boundaries of the rule of law, of the political norms that existed. And now we have a Fox News clown, Pete Hegseth, who's running the Defense Department. We have Robert F. Kennedy, a conspiracy theorist quack in the Department of Health. We have Linda McMahon. And by the way, her wrestling outfit is being sued at the moment. She was recently released from the lawsuit because they used these ring boys, as they were called. They were poor 13, 14-year-old kids from disadvantaged neighborhoods who went in, and did the work when the tour arrived. And they were being sexually abused brutally by one particular individual who was fired and brought back, and they knew this guy was a predator. They knew that he was abusing these children, and they kept him on anyway. And she is now going to be the Secretary for Education. So there's this is a sports podcast. There's so much we could say about the politics, but Trump, and there's the blatant enrichment of the Trump family. There isn't even any pretense anymore that that's not what he's doing. We just spoke about Liv and the PGA meeting in the office, which he stands to benefit from hugely if there is a merger.
No, they're great points. And I am conscious we are a sports podcast. And so a lot of the issues here around Trump, when put, next to, well, should we move 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, or, Zelensky's only polling at 4%. Maybe we should turf him out, which was a complete parodying of what the Russians had said that morning, which was so chilling. That these pale into insignificance. I'm conscious of that. But you mentioned, how this golf situation may well enrich the family. Just this morning, in Mark's paper, actually, the New York Post, Aaron de Souza, who's the man behind the enhanced games. Basically, I think people are familiar with this at this stage. He's basically just saying, we're having the Olympics, but take all the drugs you want and let's see what happens. And that is not a glib summary. No. I mean, I could be reading that off the website. So now, just in the New York Post, I read that Donald Trump Jr. has invested in the enhanced games. De Souza is saying things like, getting the Trump name involved was a monumental effort. This is now a very American project. And so they're going to host their first enhanced games in an American city, a warm city, later this winter. And he said, Marion, we wouldn't have hosted these games in the US under the Biden administration.
They certainly would not. I mean, really, let's call this what it is. This is the Olympics, not just on steroids, but on meth, on crack, on cocaine, on anything you want to take. And de Souza is portraying the enhanced game not as this sort of a doping free-for-all. He's saying it's a celebration of humanity at large and a celebration of science. Well, it's a celebration of science if you consider Walter White from Breaking Bad a scientist. You'd probably go along with this. I mean, this is a celebration of, like, you get in there, you shove a pound of cocaine up your nose, and then you run around the track and see how much better you can do it. I remember we would have jokes about this before the Olympics because the whole doping thing is so ineffective and whatever, and say, why not just have the drug Olympics and let everybody go, you know what, I won a gold medal and I took a kilo of cocaine before I ran that race. But this is a joke. And like so many things, Trump, you think it's so absurd and so ridiculous it could never happen. And of course, Donnie Jr., who is no slouch when it comes to jumping on the Trump bandwagon and the money-making bandwagon in particular, is now infusing funding into this and throwing his weight behind it and God knows what else. So it is so bizarre, and they're offering $1 million bonus for the first sprinter to make the 100-meter world record. Well, if you load yourself up with enough junk, I suppose I could probably break the 100-meter world record if I took enough stuff in advance. We laugh about these things, but we'll see where all this goes.
Yeah, it's very grim, Mark. I mean, I don't know what you say.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I'm listening to this, and it what really this is, and it falls a little bit into the way Donald operates. It's just this kind of freak show, sideshow, and it's throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what's going to stick. He tried it with the USFL back in those years. They threw all that money at these players, lured them. It didn't work. Okay, the spaghetti didn't stick against the wall. Let's try the next project. Now, this is just the latest kind of sideshow. I mean, as a sports journalist and as a sports fan, I find nothing compelling about the enhanced games. I mean, I'm not going to watch it. I mean, as Marion just said, a sprinter, doing a bunch of lines of cocaine. I want to see if that sprinter's heart explodes by the time he or she gets to the finish line. I mean, that's what cocaine does to you at the end of the day. So, this is just another nonsensical thing that's attached to, that whole family and regime. And I don't know who's going to pay attention to it, but you know what? Some of their stuff sticks, and maybe there will be enough nutcases that'll be interested in it to watch it. I don't know.
A lot of their stuff sticks is the very intriguing thing. One last one, just on the NFL, Mark. I was surprised no sitting president had attended the Super Bowl before. Maybe it's for security reasons or something something obvious I'm not thinking of. But it did feel to me significant. Term one, Kaepernick taking the knee, a tension between Trump and the players. And there he was at the Super Bowl. On the telecast anyway, he seemed to get far more cheers than boos. Kaepernick no longer there. Taylor Swift getting booed. Like, it just felt like a thing. There was a subtext to it.
Well, I was in the building, Joe, and it didn't surprise me that he got the cheers because obviously he won presidency. Yeah. So there's enough out there that, and it's all, God bless the USA and let's wave the flag and the red, white, and blue and all that. And that's his thing, obviously. The Taylor Swift thing, I have to say, I don't really think was as much political as it was Philadelphia Eagle fans who I would say dominated the building, probably 75-25 to Kansas City fans.
Yeah.
They were just booing the significant other of one of the Chiefs' best players.
No, I agree. But I'd say Trump enjoyed it all the same.
And then he leaned into it, of course, right? And why? What are you doing leaning into that? I mean, Taylor Swift's, which is one of the most popular figures on the planet, as far as we could all see in her public image, and even if you speak to people around her privately, she doesn't do anything wrong, right? I mean, she's not any kind of, derisive, force. And the fact that Trump had to kind of take a victory lap after that Super Bowl, his reception versus her reception, just shows you how petty and nonsensical it all is.
Okay. Guys, on that cheery tone, I think we're done. So thank you so much. Marion McKeone, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And Mark Cannizzaro, who's been a US sports writer for the last 30 years plus and has played golf with Donald Trump, Mark, which I guess most of us haven't. So thank you so much for coming on as well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.